Thank you for coming to the Awaken Life podcast. I'm your host, Scott Landis. How can you live an absolutely fulfilling and purpose-filled life, maintain a passionate, intimate relationship, all while raising kids and growing multiple streams of income? That's the big question we seek to answer on this podcast by interviewing people who are already doing it. One thing we know for sure is it takes a community to do it well. So thank you for being a part of the Awaken Life community. I'm looking forward to growing with you, and on to the episode. Welcome to the Awaken Life podcast with Scott Landis. And today my guest is Chris Spanier. He's the president and chief ideator at Carpe Diem Consulting Group. And he brings decades of experience in marketing, sales, and technology to serve his clients. Launching Carpe Diem Consulting Group at the start of the pandemic, after more than a decade of doing pro bono consulting work, it has proven to be the most exhilarating job he's ever had. Chris will describe Carpe Diem as professional marketing utility players able to help their ideal clients cross a wide variety of marketing functions ranging from traditional and digital marketing, prospect research, and branding work. Chris himself has worked across various industries from tech startups to financial services to manufacturing and professional services. Carpe Diem is a SMB's on-call marketing department. Great fit for my audience here. Some highlights include quintupling sales at a startup within 12 months of joining their team, building a website that serves 5 million annual visitors with individualized content and volunteering as skills with a scholarship program, reaching deserving youth who could not otherwise afford to continue their post-high school education. And storytelling is a key element that is woven throughout all of this. Chris and his team believe we all have an amazing story to share and is passionate about helping people in business enrich and share those stories in ways that resonate with the world around them. And that's really what I am excited about today, Chris. When I think about the stories that are in your head, and I know that I love to get stories out of the people that are guests on my podcast, and I'm excited to extract that from you today. But anyways, aside from that, Chris, thanks for being on the Awaken Life podcast. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week, and now it's a great way to finish up the week. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, we're recording this on a Friday. It probably will release on like a Tuesday or Thursday, but today's a Friday, TGIF.
Thank you, and to you. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm glad you've been looking forward to it all week. That's very honoring. I appreciate that.
I've enjoyed our conversations, and having been a fan of the podcast now and getting to hear the stories, there's a fairly high bar that I've got to meet today. So that's a little stressful. But aside from that, I'm just really looking forward to the conversation today. And
we're gonna set a new bar today. Not to put any pressure on you, but I have great expectations for today. So let's start with where I usually like to start with, and it's just kind of I love for people to get to know you a little bit personally. So, where did you come from? Like, I assume you were born on planet Earth, but where did you come from? And tell a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So, the planet Earth part is maybe debatable. I was born in New Jersey.
All right.
Moved to the Midwest at a fairly young age, so I lost the accent. I lived kind of all around the country, went to school here in Ohio, was down in Texas. And then ultimately, back in the 90s, I had an opportunity to join this internet startup when we were going to make our millions. And it was just such an amazing experience. But then I fell in love and ended up following my soon-to-be wife and now in Cincinnati. And this has been home for not quite half my life, but it has certainly become home. It is probably one of the most amazing cities. It's the traditional biggest small town you could ever find. So there's my wife, Anne. We have our son, Will, our dog, Belle, and we live in the outskirts of Cincinnati, which, if anybody knows the area, there is an amusement park that's been around for about 50 years, and we happen to be 5 minutes from it. So I think I'm living every kid's dream, maybe not every adult's, but every kid's dream, being just a couple of minutes away from a bunch of roller coasters and rides. And so it's a pretty neat place to be.
Wow. Are you close enough where you can hear the screams of terror?
So in the distance on the right kind of night, you can hear the echoing wails of the people. You always hear the fireworks on a good night, and it's a lot of fun. So it's a big part of the Cincinnati culture and community. And my wife grew up on the other side of Cincinnati, and she said, this was the big vacation. They would take the big 45-minute drive across town, and now she's like, it's in my backyard. So kind of a nice place to be.
Wow, that's nice. Okay, so that little phrase you said, but then I fell in love. Man, so many like amazing, epic, manly stories are gone a different way because but then I fell in love. Like I was going to be a fighter jet pilot. I was going to fly planes all over the world, but then I fell in love and I decided that didn't go well with the whole wife and kids thing. So I get you.
Yeah, but I think I was going to be the world's first astronaut fireman president. And then suddenly I meet my wife and I'm like, there's actually a better option. So it's been
hindsight is always 2020.
You
forgot lumberjack on that.
Oh, shoot. We should have talked much younger. That would have
been. Nice. Okay. So you got to be a part of a startup in the 90s and tell me more about that. How did that go? How did that end up going?
So it was this amazing experience. So I knew nothing. I came out, I was a newly minted MBA. And like I said, we were going to make our millions. And I was the fourth employee. The other three employees were all the owners. And so I was the new kid. I came in and I was in charge of sales and marketing and customer service. I mean, it was the stereotypical, everybody wore every hat. And I wasn't dating anybody. I came out of school. I was fortunate. I came out broke, but debt free. So all I really cared about was, could I make my rent? Could I pay for my food? And, occasionally maybe, go out and have some fun time and again. So for the first couple of years, it was pouring in like 80, 90, 100-hour plus weeks, just trying to build this thing. And it was funny because at the time, technically the internet's been around for decades in some format or another, but really it was in the 90s when people started to discover it and businesses started to wake up to this. And we were so early in this process that our original business was, companies were scared to be connected to the internet, which is kind of funny to think about now. So we would act as their connection. So if let's say you had an office in New York and you had another office in Los Angeles, we would be that hub that would connect them, allow them to communicate and to they could be using different systems. And we were sort of like the universal translator to get people to communicate. And not long thereafter, we started doing things called websites, and people were like, well, why do we need to do that? And so it was just a fun experience to get to do things that nobody else was doing at the time. And part of it was storytelling, but you would go and you would talk to people and you'd say, well, here's what the potential is and here's what the opportunity. So as a marketer, oh my gosh, Scott, it was so much fun. Because you would get people who would be interested, they would call you up and they're like, well, tell me more. And then you start just weaving this picture, and we all bought in. There was no like shenanigans going on where we were trying to sell something that we didn't believe in. We were all committed. We're like, well, would you like to be able to? You start painting that picture, and man, I mean, one of the stats you very kindly shared was the quadrupling the growth in the first year. That was that company, and then we doubled again the year after that, and I think we doubled the year after that. And I'd love to say it was all the great marketing leadership I provided, but frankly, I think we just were at the right place at the right time. We had a great product and we had a really good story and people were buying into it. So it was a lot of fun. The other end of part of the story though, so I was about three and a half years there, continued to grow, started building a team. We were up to like 16, 18, 20 people. And I started dating my wife and we were in two different cities. And the other thing that was happening.
Where were you located at the time?
This was Columbus, Ohio. And then
not too far away then.
Not too far away. So it was a long distance relationship, but very doable. And my wife Ann and I were getting more serious, and it looked like, maybe we were going to put a ring on each other's fingers in the near future. And she just started a new job here in the Cincinnati area. And I'm like, well, would you think about coming to Columbus? And it was the Chris job, and the job won. So, but then she started asking me, like, well, what about you coming down here? And the interesting thing from the company's perspective was the three owners were now starting to think about kind of their exit and the next generation and what was going to happen. So we were actually negotiating with companies to acquire our little startup. And this is well before the big IPO days and all this, but it looked like the owners were going to land fairly well. So it was a really good time for me to say, you know what? Okay, I think it's time to tap out. And then I had an opportunity to come down to Cincinnati, join at the other end of the spectrum. I went from an internet startup to this financial services company that was a century old, highly regulated. So I had a little bit of work flash going from like no rules to suddenly one of the most regulated industries you'd ever care to see, but still great experiences throughout.
Yeah, what a interesting contrast. And now you're not still with that financial services firm, right?
No, that oh gosh, 5-10 years ago, I think we wrapped up there. But it was a lot of fun. It was, and on one hand, it was they were so far behind, and I don't mean that in a mean way. It was just, again, they moved more slowly than some startup that really had no rules and no guidelines. They took very seriously their responsibility to their policyholders. So they were cautious. And I'll admit the first probably 6 months there, it was frustrating. It helped mature me, and I think it helped temper me. But at the same time, I think I was a good influence because I was constantly asking, well, what if, or could we, or how about? And my first boss when I hired on there, he sat me down within the first probably 2 or 3 weeks, and he kind of outlined the people that, not to damage the relationship, but just to warn me. He named like 4 or 5 people that he thought we were going to have a difficult time working with because they were fairly conservative and they were very, and rightly so. And he was very complimentary about that. But he said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to innovate, we're trying to push forward, and that is not inherently in the DNA of the company. So we're going to need to work together. And so it really was. I learned to respect wildly different perspectives and to listen carefully and to figure out what the concerns were. But then it was a really good opportunity for younger me to also sit down and to figure out, okay, so this is where they're at, this is where their comfort level is, this is their concerns. Is there a viable way forward? And then to keep innovating and coming up with ways to ultimately figure out how we could do some really pretty cool stuff. So we did some really neat things over the years.
Yeah, it sounds like that was very balancing and just made you a better version of who you are professionally today and, since then. So that's good that happened. It's one of those things that, one of those stories of life happening for you when at the moment you probably felt pretty frustrated and maybe missing the good old days. I don't know, maybe looking back and thinking, gosh, it was so much more fun and so much more enjoyable, and this sucks. But I just want to remind myself and others that, it's when things really suck that maybe you can look for that. Why is this happening for me? Is always a great question.
I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that, Scott. I jokingly call myself a hyper optimist. And what I mean,
I relate.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that actually doesn't surprise me knowing you. But I mean, for the audience, I mean, I guess for me, it's like you have to look for the good. And again, it could be perceived as a little Pollyanna-ish, meaning like, you're deluding yourself, you're fooling yourself, Chris. But on the flip side of it, I would argue and say, because I have that perspective, I think I see more opportunities. It's like, okay, so I'm in a really bad place right now. I get it. So, if you're a person of faith, you can look at that and say, well, what is the higher power trying to show me? If you are just a person saying, hey, I'm living my life, there is opportunity in adversity. So I think, it can get annoying. I think you have to give my wife credit. I think she is a saint.
Yeah.
I had this one joke I would tell people. I'm like, if the glass isn't just half full, guys, there's half a cup of air in there too. And my team, they tolerated me, but it was like, we have to look for these opportunities because while everybody else is focusing on what's going wrong, and I'm not saying you ignore that, you have to address whatever your challenges are, but you can focus also on what the opportunities might be. That's really where you can make some huge gains and huge strides, and personally as well as professionally.
Man, I mean, I definitely resonate with that. And especially the part about being a little worried that maybe I'm annoying the people around me, or maybe like, hearing the positive what did you call it? Hyper optimistic words coming out of my mouth,
Mhm.
and hearing them come out of my mouth and wondering, gosh, I wonder what I sound like to these people around me. Like they are constantly hearing this positive stuff, even when it's not looking that positive. I mean, how does that land? I don't know. I have these conversations in my head. I don't know if that's you as well, but I'm definitely relating to what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely right too. And I think that's a big part of being a good listener. I had a person that worked for me at one point, and she just had, gosh, I mean, my heart even to this day goes out to her because she had so many just bad things happen in her life, and one of them towards the time that where we were no longer working together, where I left, but probably about a year before that happened, she got a pretty significant medical diagnosis, and we were very fortunate at this company. We had a part-time but an on-site nurse, and they were the one that actually got the report back, called her down into her office, and then they were talking. And so then I get this phone call saying, "Chris, can you come down and join us?" Oh boy, I haven't been called to the principal's office in a while.
Yeah.
I get down there, and then they share the news with me with my colleague's permission, and she was devastated. And so it wasn't the right time to say it's going to be okay and you can do. And so I think I think Scott, you're very much like this, and hopefully I am too, at least to some extent, where you are aware of the person that you're being with and you want to be present for. And I think it's a level of intensity. It's a question of are you beaming this bright sunbeam of optimism at them, which they're probably not ready to accept, or is it a very small candle, just to say that there is a light in that darkness? And I remember saying something to her about, not sharing names, but like, you're one of the strongest people I know. This is not welcome news. It's going to be tough, but you're not going through it alone. A lot of other people have gone through and survived and thrived through this, and we're going to be here with you. And you can't take the pain, or you can't take the hurt or the fear or all the other things that you're feeling. So at that point, I think it was more about planting the seed. Say, I know it seems bleak. You just had your world drop out from under you, but I have faith. Even if you don't, I do, and I'm here for you. And I think that's one of the kindness that we can give to each other, especially some of the challenges we face every day. Is how do you listen? How do you be present for somebody? And how do you remind them not to be annoying, not to be like over again Pollyannish, but to say, look, I think there's a way forward, and just to give them that little bit of hope, and then you can build on that as things progress.
Yeah.
So, very astute observation, sir.
Yeah, that's good. I think not that us hyper optimists are the best out there, but everybody's wired differently. But there are some that are quick, maybe the opposite side of the spectrum, quick to see the negative, quick to maybe, in my view, be not so fun to be around, because I'm just like, I don't want to hear all this negativity, right? Not that that's wrong, it's just different, right? So, but I'd much rather hang around, an echo chamber of positivity and but you might need that balance, right? You might need, and it's funny, I was just talking to my daughter on the way to driving her to school this morning, and like, I'm dealing with this very, what's the word? The decision that is very important, a heavy weighted decision. It's like a make or break decision. And I was just sharing with her, I'm looking forward to having my business partner listen in on this decision process, because I know what it was. She asked me, what did your no name usual advisor say? And I said, well, I can't really talk to him because it's like an echo chamber of positivity. He doesn't like poke holes and stuff. He doesn't like be devil's advocate. He just agrees, and we get together and it's just really a lot of fun. And we ended up like, it's just a big air of positivity, and we just go on, and but nothing necessarily gets accomplished. And I was telling her, I really need the other side to like kind of challenge my thinking on this, just so I can vet my process and maybe see the other side. Sometimes we need that balance, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Um, you know, I had an opportunity to mentor three, I think it was Red doesn't matter, but three interns from one of the local universities. And it was me and, another manager, and we were talking like, well, how do we make this a more meaningful engagement for them? So we don't want them to do filing. We want them to actually get some real life experience. So one of the things we ended up coming up with, and it does come back, I think, to your point, is we arranged for Tuesday coffees. So we would all come in a little early. We would just talk, and it was their invitation just to ask any kind of question, or for my friend Dan and I to come through and to give them, our sage advice with our couple of decades more experience, or in my case, maybe 2 or 3 decades, but be that as it may. And one week we ended up hitting on the ideas like we really need to give each other, we need to pass on to these guys just critical thinking skills. Yeah, like how to approach things. And it was an interesting exercise because I realized as we were preparing for this, my critical thinking skills weren't as well developed as I wanted them to be. Again, speaking as an optimist, I'm like, oh, we can do this. We're going to be successful. And generally we are. But I'm like, how do I help this? And so it was really enlightening for me to be a more optimistic person, but to say, well, how do you approach critical thinking, asking good questions, difficult questions in a way that is not critical, that helps us think through it. And what really resonated with me is when I kind of got into the core of this, I realized, man, critical thinking isn't meant about tearing things down. It's meant about looking at it objectively and ultimately trying to build up so that you can succeed with what it is you're trying to do. So ultimately, I think this inadvertent, like, hey, what are we going to teach these young adults this week, ended up being something for myself that I think was far more powerful. And I started incorporating it into some of my team meetings, my team of just, gosh, guys, how do we, without being destructive, how do we make ourselves and the people we interact with be more positive, impact them positively, so you're ultimately more likely to be successful. So my optimism was, that box was checked as the end goal. But the process, then suddenly it was more okay to say, all right, I can ask some tough questions. I can, because I really am excited about the end product. I'm excited about where we're going.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask you if you can relate to this. I mean, again, relating to this idea of a hyper optimist, when there's been times in situations where I found myself after thinking, I'm impervious to this, but, I find myself in a really bad rut and really negative thinking. And it feels so out of sorts. I don't know. It's like, I almost don't know how to deal with that. And it's real though. And without just sweeping it under the rug and saying, well, I'm just going to ignore that because it doesn't feel good. Right. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As you're describing it, I'm nodding along going, yep, been there. In some ways, if you think about peaks and valleys, for those that try to, you're either really up a lot of the time or maybe you're down a lot of the time. But for those of us that maybe identify more hyper optimist or optimist, when you hit those valleys, it's scary because it's a deeper dive. And you're like, gosh, how do we get out of this? And I think in some ways it's know thyself. So, I speaking specifically for me, I know through my life, whenever I've faced, when I've had the panic of, I'm in a really bad spot here, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't see a way forward. What I've come to finally appreciate is, one, I don't need to always solve it myself. So it's, being able to have good mentors or support network around me is, I think, really key. But me specifically, I need to work. And by that, I mean, I may not have the right idea, I may not have the right answer, but by getting some of that traction underfoot, by actually putting something down on paper, talking it out, working it through, in my head, I start to feel like I'm doing something. And that doing something, that sense of control that I get from that, then starts to help me corral okay, so this isn't quite chaos. This isn't quite as hopeless as I think it might be. Okay, maybe I'm not on the right answer yet, I'm a little bit further along. And then again, that optimism kicks in and says, okay, I think I see a way forward here. I'm not there yet. The optimist knows I'm going to get there, but I'm going to get, I'm going to get to that place. I think the harder question is if you're generally a more pessimistic person or maybe a realistic person and you get to that bad spot, then I think, those situations are, I think, arguably a little more, well, it's more foreign for me, and I think potentially a little more challenging because you almost have to train yourself to say, look, look back at everything that's happened, especially the bad stuff. And hopefully, it's ended in a good place. If given enough time, I think it does. But then, you look at past examples, and even if you emotionally can't get to that place where you're like, it's going to be fine, if you look back and you're like, gosh, there was another time when I felt this low, this bad, this depressed, this hopeless, but I came through it. It wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy it, but okay, objectively, intellectually, almost putting the emotion aside, recognizing it and not shutting it away, but recognizing the emotional part is probably having some impact on how you're seeing things. But to look at, gosh, the pattern is there. I know I'm going to get through this. I don't know how, but I past experiences is going to succeed. So that's a really tough and insightful question to ask.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I'm curious if there's a story that comes to mind of being in a tough place, because what I heard you say is, in a nutshell, sometimes just like taking action, even if it's just writing something down, even if the action is, you kind of alluded to this, like what would the optimist say in this situation? And I love that as a side, like, essentially the optimist is an archetype. You can ask your different archetypes what would the warrior do in this situation? What would the comforting person do in this situation? What did the loving person do in this situation? But those are all good. But I'm curious if there's a story of when you found yourself in a down place and just however long you took to get there, but then action occurred. And then, I always like to encourage somebody who might be in that down place right here, right now, listening to this, hearing a story of, hey, sometimes you just got to take some action and see what happens and where that goes, regardless of if it turns into like a peak experience or not. But anything come to mind there?
Examples that I care to share. So from work perspective, Scott, one that comes to mind was it goes back to that financial services company. So I'm mid-late 20s at this point. So old enough to know better, young enough that I still have lots to learn, which I still do. But I remember, so the building was actually a 6-story building. And the only reason that's important is I was working enough hours that I wasn't able to get to the gym pretty regularly. So I would always take the stairs. And interestingly enough, I was one of the few people that ever take the stairs. So the stairs were kind of like my private space, echoey private space. And I remember one time something just blew up. And I think it was my fault, like something I missed or hadn't thought about or whatever. And I was getting called on the carpet by one of the senior executives. In fact, this guy was probably the one that everybody was scared of. And I remember going down the staircase and just like, I'm a dead man. I'm a dead man. I'm like vocalizing this. And I'm thinking, if anybody else is in the stairwell, I'm going to convince them that I'm a nut job. So maybe I'm out of a job. Problem solved. But I was sitting on the 6th floor at this point. So I had 6 flights of stairs to go down. So I had a little bit of time to at least get this out. So the first thing was I just needed to squeeze that emotional sponge to recognize the oh crud moment. So let's get that out of your system. And then by the time I hit about the 3rd floor, I was like, okay, I don't need to say that as much. What are some options here? And taking a few, I think I actually stopped at one point and just took a couple of breaths to calm myself. I was like, all right, what can I do? What can I say? And the first thought was, I got to own this because I've made the mistake. But the second thing is, okay, so then how do you go about fixing it? What are the steps to it? And I didn't have a full thought out plan, but by the time I got down to the conference room on the 1st floor and walked in, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So part of this was self-inflicted. But at the same time, they're like, okay, so what happened? And going through that, like that emotional sponge comment was probably a pretty good analogy because I think
I love that.
I got down there and I'm like, so here's what happened. And I didn't obfuscate. I didn't push it onto anybody else. I messed this up. here's what I think I'm going to do next to resolve this. And so by laying out this stuff, they were like, okay. And I remember going to my boss afterwards, and because after this happened, they're like, okay, go make it happen, keep us informed. And it was a couple of days later, we did get to we were fine. Stressful, put in the extra time, worked late several days. But I went to my boss and I'm like, Jim, why didn't you lay into me? And thankfully I had that relationship with him. I could have that kind of frank conversation.
Mm-hmm.
He made, the what he said was, Chris, look, mistakes happen. I do not like them. This was a big one, but you took ownership. You came in with maybe not a fully fleshed out plan, but you had a way forward for us. It was reasonably well thought out, and it was an opportunity that you were going to learn. And I fully expect that you will never make the same kind of mistake again.
Mm.
And gosh, Scott, I mean, when he said that, I think that was the final stamp on this, where I could look at it and say, okay, I'm gonna make mistakes in my career. I'm a human being. I plenty of them. It's not so much the fact that I made the mistake, but what I'm going to do about it, and then that I learn from it, so that I hopefully don't make the same mistake repeatedly. So, yeah, I think,
Dude.
yeah, it's just going through and owning it, but also then owning the solution, which really seems to help, and then putting in the work.
That was a good sermon right there. I mean, worth the price of admission for listening into the podcast today. Like if you find yourself in a tough place, emotional place, I love that. Start with squeeze the emotional sponge. What a great picture. I've never heard anybody say that before, but as soon as you hear it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I can squeeze the emotional sponge, release some of that, right?
Yeah.
And then own it. You gave this 4-step process. It's so beautiful. Then own it. Just own it. Own whatever it is. Take responsibility, and then, plan / decide what to do. Make a decision. Decide. Like I love the etymology of that. Like decide means, cut off. Like make a decision, change something, right? And then take action. I mean, 4-step process. Like, there you go. Like, we can make a blog post on that.
There you go. But yeah, it's I think the best lessons. So as another aside, my dad, he's no longer with us, but he was just one of the most impressive people I ever met. My grandparents were both essentially peasants from Europe. They came here as either children. I think my grandmother was 17. My grandfather was maybe 8 or 9. Neither one of them had finished grade school. And my dad, then, only child, first generation American. And not only does dad go through and finish high school, but he goes on to college, and he goes on to get his PhD. He's probably one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And a lot of, not perfect, but a lot to respect and to admire about the man. But it took me years to realize that growing up in his shadow, I had a deep-seated fear of failure. Like, dad could do anything. And it really just, it's because he had to. I mean, he was born at the tail end of the Depression. And I do remember him telling me one time that at like 11 years old, they had a little mom and pop store in Philadelphia. And my dad was doing the books for their store at 11 years old. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, Chris, you got to understand, at 11, I was better educated than either one of your grandparents. So of course I was going to do that. And that just so defined who he was. He wasn't out for the glory. He did what he needed to do for others, etc. And it was very inspirational. But as a young man or as a child, I grew up around that. And my mom was amazing as well. But my dad, especially, his work ethic, he never made a mistake that I saw. And so when I got to school and when I got into the workplace, I had that same mentality. And I think it was those kind of incidents where I did make my mistakes. And I'm like, okay, I may not be quite as impressive as Edward J. Spanier, but be in a better place because of it, because I'm learning how to deal with these things and how to get smarter as a result. So yeah, it's all through life. Learn from my mistakes, please.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. Tribute to your dad too. All right. Well, let's shift gears a bit. We went down a rabbit trail or two there. That's good. I like it. But I want to get back to professionally, Carpe Diem, and the work you do with your clients and marketing. And when we met before, I was just really impressed with what you do, and I wanted to expose my audience to it. So let's just take a broad question. We talked a little bit about it at the opener, but what is it that Carpe Diem is about? Where'd the name come from? I mean, it obviously means something, but why did you pick that as your name?
So let me start with the name. Carpe Diem is, I doubt many people would be surprised by this, but the Robin Williams, the Dead Poet Society from back in the, I think, late 80s. I happened to watch that movie at a very formative point in my life. And Robin Williams' performance was just really kind of blew me away. And it was one of those moments where, gosh, it was like, I am in control of my own life. I mean, there are things that are going to happen to you and that are outside of our control. But how I react to it, I think that was one of the first times I really appreciated that. And so throughout college then and into my work career, Carpe Diem just was this thing in the back of your head, seize the day. And there's a point in it where Robin Williams' character says, Carpe Diem, boys, make your lives extraordinary. And it kind of struck me that I'm like, gosh, no one's going to come along and give me an amazing life. No one's going to give me these amazing experiences. It's on me. So I decided kind of then and there that I did not want to hopefully have a nice long life, but I didn't want to be the 90-year-old guy laying in a rocking chair or laying in his hospital bed and going, I wish I had. So as the opportunities have presented themselves, I don't say yes to everything, but at the same time, I do look for things like, man, this would be a really neat thing to try to experiment with. So over my years, I've done things like, and this isn't anything about how great I am. This is just this mentality. I was an exchange student in Japan, which really helped me grow up and see the world as a much more cohesive whole than just sort of this, I know my little part of the United States. Suddenly it's like, oh, wow, people are people everywhere and different cultures and different societies, etc. But we're people, which is awesome. Or I have an incredibly healthy fear of heights. But at 26, I decided I was going to jump out of an airplane, entirely because four buddies who were the same age were like, hey, we're going to jump out of a plane. And amazing what testosterone, how much that lowers your IQ. So I've had, and there's plenty of other examples, but it was these opportunities where it's like, I want to seize the day. I want to look back on my life and have as few regrets as possible. So when I started my business, it was one of these situations where I actually landed my first client before I'd actually established the business. I've been doing pro bono, for a dozen years maybe at this point, but I was now hanging out my shingle. At least I was trialing it as a part-time. And they're like, great, send us the contract. Great. And I got off the phone call and I'm like, I need to set up the LLC. I need to set up the website. And suddenly all the marketing and the business things happened. I'm like, well, what am I going to do this thing? And I'd actually been calling my pro bono work Carpe Diem Consulting. So I was like, well, it served me well for a dozen years. Let's continue with it. So that really was the genesis of it. And it's every time I look at the website or I send an email, I see Carpe Diem, and it's a really nice, subtle reminder to me about what I want to do personally, but what I want to bring for my clients. And then to your question about what we do, we're a marketing firm. So we help primarily small and medium-sized businesses. We work, mostly in the region, but I work with companies all over the country. And gosh, Scott, when it comes right down to it, we help them tell good stories. I have been blessed with the clients I've worked with. I'm certainly selective about I think I can help you. And if I'm not, then certainly I'm going to try to help you find somebody who I think can. But the companies I've found and I've had the privilege of working with, I love their stories. I get in there and body language, I'm leaning into the table. I'm not quite my hands on my fist and tell me more. It's close. And what's really fun about the work I do is when I run into a situation where there's a company that it's not that they don't believe in themselves anymore, but they've gotten so used to their story, they don't see it as a good story. And
Mm.
I'll give you a really quick example. There was a gentleman here in the area. He is he's the American dream. He came from another country. He's brought his family, working really hard, started his own business, and he's still, it's early days for him. And we get connected. We start talking about what it is he's doing, and apparently, like, my enthusiasm for his business model. About a month later, he reaches out to me. He goes, "I want to hire you," and I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "I don't have a lot of money." I'm like, "I get it. I love the story enough. I want to help you." And what was interesting about his story was he started his company, and he had this idea for a business. And when he went to try to research it, what he found was that there really wasn't any data to help him make an informed decision. So he ends up building his own kind of analysis model using artificial intelligence and data scraping and this heuristic logic. And where he ultimately concluded was, yeah, this isn't going to be a viable business. But then he looks at what he built to do the analysis, and he's like, okay, this actually has some legs to it. So he goes to a couple of companies and he said, "Do you have an interest in this?" And they were like, "Yes." So he starts landing clients, but they were in the kind of the building materials, the industrial business, so the products you might see at a Home Depot or Lowe's. And he starts building this, and he's having some success. And that's when I met him. But then he kind of gets challenged by another professional, and it's like, is that really the industry you want to be in? Don't you want to be in something that's a lot more innovative and is bringing a lot more products to market? So he's like, "Gosh, you're right. It's the same concept, the same technology. But if I were to do something like, I don't know, personal care products, they introduced something like 15,000 products in the last 5 years. So what he's doing in his analysis system, he's like, could help them." So I'll stop there. But his challenge was, what he saw was 3 distinct phases to his business, and that he had failed in each one. Had his business idea, it wasn't viable. Then I started doing this industrial research thing, and it was good, but it wasn't scaled enough or scalable. And now I'm trying this brand new thing. And I'm like, not true. You're on a journey, and you are, evolving your business. And so look at this. You've got, what you're going to show your clients is you have this viable technology that you developed that may help you and now clients make informed decisions. And now you're expanding into even more markets. And to see his face, that we all need to eat, we all need to, pay our mortgages and but that almost was payment enough, because what it did was, again, I was just reflecting back what he was telling me, and
Right.
maybe gave him a perspective on it, but it was his story. And I got to help him see that again. And his enthusiasm from that point on was just infectious. So
Wow.
it's those kind of things that I love. And so, whether it's, there's a metal manufacturing company is a client of mine right now. They started 60 years ago. They were making stainless steel kitchen tables on a farm in Kentucky. 5 brothers.
Wow.
The brothers are all gone now, but the current ownership and leadership of the team, they are now, they work with businesses all over the world. And this little metalworking shop in the rural Kentucky now makes parts that go into outer space with some of the largest aerospace companies. They're parts that keep us up. And I'm like, and when I met with these guys, they're like, "Yeah, we're pretty good at what we do," and and we did a workshop with them. And by the end of it, they were like, "We're pretty awesome." I'm like, "Yeah, I think you are." So that's the part that really keeps me going, that tells me,
Wow.
what I'm doing, I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate to get to tell these stories, to get to hear them. And then, people are like, "What? Please excuse the immodesty, but I get this, 'Oh, you're really good at this.'" I'm like, "Well, thank you. But again, all I'm doing is reflecting back what you're telling me." And it's like, I can't believe people pay me to do this, because it is so,
Yeah.
so it really is. It's a blessing to do what I do.
Wow, I want that experience. I want to tell you all my woes and pains and struggles of my business and have you tell me a story back. That sounds awesome. That sounds like a fantastic experience. So once that's done,
Yeah.
how does that translate into marketing? How does that bring leads in? Help me connect those dots.
That's a great question again, but that really is the genesis. So once you have the story, the message you down. I mean, if I work with somebody, they're like, we know who we are. Great, teach it to me, so I can how to convey that, to help share that. But if they don't, then the opportunity is, well, then let's spend a little bit of time up front and get the story down. The metal fabrication company, they needed some things so quickly that they were like, not yet. So I'm like, okay, so I'm going to take what you've shared with me. We're going to start getting into this. And we did. And then 6 months later, like, okay, now we're ready for the website. I'm like, perfect. Time out. We need to go have that conversation about who you guys are. So then that got woven through it. But that process was, so once we know kind of who you are, the value that you bring, what it is that you take to the market, and what makes you kind of unique, your secret sauce, if you will, then you start to look at, well, what do you want to do? And with some of my clients, it's we want to tell our story. We don't know who to tell it to. So I happen to be a bit of a data geek. So some of my clients, I'm going to go off and I never buy lists. I will go off and I will research, like, okay, here's the industries I think you're going to want to go after, and we'll figure out different ways to do that. Looking at existing customers, or trying to figure out who their ideal prospects or their personas are. We'll find those clients. Then we start crafting the message. And I've got a technology background as well from the startup days. So it's like, well, do we want to automate your outreach? And I'll help you do that. Or, do we want to do in-person visits? Or, do we want to do seminars and invite folks local? So it's more of a local play. It's really a question of, like, how do we touch, what points of the marketing spectrum do we touch? A lot of the work up front is, like, I just put together a proposal for a wealth management company in town the other day. And they started off by saying, we need help. We're working on our latest business strategy. We need help developing our marketing strategy. And so what I proposed to them was, I said, that's great. First thing you need to do is to get me up to speed on what you're trying to accomplish as a business. And then we are going to suggest, here's a laundry list of things, everything we could potentially do. But what I want to do then is pick the ones that I think are going to be the most effective. We're going to tie that to one or more of your business goals. And then we'll come up with our metrics to figure out how it is, how we were succeeding. At the same time, I want to work with you. I want to talk to your clients. The owner has a board, 3-person board that he works with. I'd like to talk with them. And I want to get to know you better. And I want to know you both from the outside and inside out, as well as the outside in. And then let's see if we can't refine that story. And then that's going to inform, are we going to do something on LinkedIn? Well, these are all going to be our social posts, or your Facebook. Well, they're not going to do as much Facebook, but where are we going to be? What are the tactics we're going to put in place to help tell that story? But it really does start with that story. And then you start layering on different ways as they have appetite and budget and interest to where we make that happen.
It sounds like the best way to go for marketing, but it also sounds expensive. I think where our very small entrepreneur business kind of market, our audience is, we're putting together parts of that, like, oh, I know I'm supposed to do some SEO. Oh, I know I'm supposed to do some pay-per-click. Oh, I know I'm supposed to do some organic messaging. And it's all kind of hodgepodge. What you're describing sounds like the right way to do it. But any thought for somebody thinking, that would be nice if I could afford that kind of, that's like the Fortune 500 companies. That's what they do, but I can't do that.
I think you've hit on something that's probably one of the most systemic issues that we face as companies, especially small and medium-sized businesses. Sure. It's like, that's too big for me. I'm not there yet. And I was actually on a call earlier today with a client, and I love them, but they've merged 2 practices together. And they're still figuring themselves out. And so I've tried a few times to say, let's have the strategic conversation. Let's think about where you're going. And they're very much more, we need to be tactical. We need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I actually, not to be blatant and make a plug here, but I started my own little podcast, nothing like what you do here, but I call it Practical Actionable Marketing. And I think I weave that through with my clients. I try to meet them where they're at. So as a consultant, one of the biggest challenges is you're going to come in and you're like, hey, here's everything you can or should do. And then the client will look at that and be like, I can't afford that. I'm not interested in that. That's not for me, yada, yada, yada. That's fine. what I want to do is to have that opportunity to have the conversation with them, and then we can prioritize. That's exactly what happened with the fabrication company of here's everything we could possibly do. And they're like, it's too early. We're not ready for that yet, but here's what we need most. And so I approach that with my clients and say, look, I'm here to help you. I want you to be successful. So I will continue to bring this up saying, hey, I do think we need to have this other conversations, but I absolutely get this. I came from a startup. We couldn't do anything. I remember going in and asking for a budget to launch a new product. The president looks at me and he goes, you can have 10 cents on the dollar. And I'm like, okay. So we had to go back and figure out how we were going to be successful. And we ultimately were. But I got immersed early on with the how a small and medium-sized business works. So I would challenge anybody who's thinking that way to say, that's one, it's okay. You're being a good steward of your business and of your money and of your budget. But the second time, don't let that stop. Get started with something, start getting smarter, start doing something. And then as it builds, layer more on. So just pick what the number one or number two things are. And then that actually helps to do more and more and more. I've seen it time and again with my clients, with other businesses. It's almost the excuse. This is too big. I don't want to take it on. Okay, let's make it into smaller pieces then, and then get going.
Right. So it sounds like regardless of budget, you would, because of how you do things, you would want to say, it's okay. Let's figure out what the story is first. And then we can decide what's going to get the quickest ROI, what you can afford to do. And then we'll build out a strategy that will ultimately get us to the place, because marketing should pay for itself over time, right? So, so you kind of have that in your back pocket. So it makes sense though that, and I think this is what I really was attracted to, like, when I was saying, I think you do something special, like coming from that place, like building on the right foundation, because you can talk to so many marketing companies out there and they just sell you a piece of, they sell you a tactic, and it might be over years of, I went to that marketing guy, or that marketing guy, and they're all these tactics that don't necessarily fit into a big picture strategy. And that's where I see the huge advantage of coming to you and talking to you, and at least getting that strategy piece. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to think, like, I see myself as the advisor. I'm the Jiminy Cricket to where it's like, well, this is kind of ideally what you should be doing, but it's rare that we live in the ideal world. So if I could, I even go so far, Scott. I think I may have shared this with you last time we talked, but I've been toying with the idea, and I'm actually now starting to integrate it into my own business development and my own outreach. Is the first meeting with me is always complimentary. So I will pour into a client. I'll sit an hour, 2 hours with them over a cup of coffee. I'll even buy, but I want to know their story, because one, it helps me see, can I help them? Where are they at? What can we do? And then I'm like, all right, have you tried this? Have you thought about this? Have you done this? And whether they work with me or not, I want them to have value, because I'm trying to pour into the world. But then the part that I think I shared with you is I've actually started to implement something in the last 6 months or so, that I'm telling my clients, if we work together for 6 months and you're not fully satisfied, then I'm going to write you a check for 25% of everything you've invested with me. And the reason I do that, no one's taking me up on that. So I say it with all sincerity, all like, I will do this. I've got the checkbook upstairs. I will write this to you. But the flip side of it is, I'm trying to make it easy for somebody to say, all right, how do I reduce the risk? Because there's also this perception sometimes that marketing is magic. And marketing can seem like that, right? But we also have so many tools available to us now that we should be looking at. Well, what's the success metric? Whether ideally it's something quantifiable, at least qualified. Like, well, I want to, when I talk to my clients, I want them to say they've heard about me or they're whatever it might be. Great. But let's be intentional up front. And then being prioritizing the work, that's perfectly fine. My budget has never been big enough to do everything I want to do. I've learned plenty of times where it's like, all right, what's going to have the biggest impact? What's going to help us the most? So I offer my clients this way as a way for them to get started. It's like, hey, look, work with me, have this conversation. This isn't going to cost you anything. We're both going to get smarter as a result of it. It's time well spent. And then if you think we can help you, we're going to be very realistic. I'm going to guard your money like it was my money. I'm not going to waste it. And then if you're not satisfied after that period of time, I want you to be. I've even gone to one client in particular. They outgrew me. This gentleman wanted to do something that I was okay at, but I'm like, oh, he's betting most of his ongoing outreach on this channel, this function. I'm okay at it. I'm not great. So I went to him and I said, Steve, I think we need to get somebody else in here. And Scotty looks at me like I had two heads. And I'm like, I want you to be successful. That is what the last year plus we've been working together has been all about. I think you're on the right path. And I'm willing to work with you and to learn with you, but that's not the best way to spend your dollars. So he actually found somebody, kept me around for 4 more months. And I'm like, you need to be mindful of your budget. So he trailed me off, but he found this amazing lady who she had gone deep in this. So she was just the perfect fit. And I think the world of her. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I love that's a great offer. I mean, like I said, I want to have that experience of just hearing my story reflected back to me in a way that makes me, excited about it again. Sounds like that is a complimentary first meeting with you, and that's awesome. So how do people get a hold of you, get started with you? What's that look like?
Well, probably multiple ways. Obviously, whatever's the easiest way for somebody to reach me. LinkedIn, I'm certainly out there. Just see Spanier is my ID. Website is carpediemcg.com. But frankly, the easiest, because with a name like Spanier, it's not always the most obvious. Easiest way to get a hold of me is an email address. It is simply just Chris at CDCG, which is Carpe Diem Consulting Group. So CDCG.us, not .com, .us. So what is that? Okay. 11 characters, and you can get a hold of me.
CDCGconsulting.us.
CDCG.us. Just those 4 letters.
We don't even have the CDCG.us. So Chris at CDCG.us.
Yep. And there are plenty of other email addresses. And if you write me there, you're going to get the whole Chris at CarpeDiemConsultingGroup.com. I really don't need to make people type that much. So
that was very kind of you to grab the URL CDCG.us.
If you're looking for options out there, and yeah, so thankfully it was available and I'm all set.
Nice. All right. Well, we'll put all of those links, like LinkedIn, website, email address in the show notes. And when people get a hold of you, just tell them you want to have you tell them their story, or what's the action item there?
What I would offer is this. So I'm kind of like a story junkie. So I'm happy to jump on like a Zoom call, or if somebody's in the region, I'm happy to go drive and meet with them. But what I want to do is I want to listen. So, just to drop a note and say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I want to tell you about what we're dealing with, what our challenges might be, and then see what you think. And then I will ask questions. I'm usually good about, you may not get that sense today, but I usually will shut up and I will ask my pointed questions just to kind of help find out as much as I possibly can. If I have the opportunity, I will go and I'll do a little bit of research ahead of time just to get a sense of who are they, what's their message, etc. And then I just really want to go and have a fun conversation. And then when it's all said and done, usually I'll digest it for a little bit of time. I've got taking my copious notes, and then come back and be like, here's what I think I've heard, and then allow them to react to it. It's like, yeah, I think they're close, or let's tweak this a little bit. But I've yet to find somebody who's in such just a dire place that their story is hopeless, or it's not. I'm like, there's a good way forward, and maybe there's tears that has to go into it. Maybe it's not quite what you thought it was going to look like, but there's a good way forward. So talk to an optimist; they'll help you.
Yeah. And messaging is such a key component of anything that you're currently doing. So to have somebody mirror back to you what they're hearing after listening really carefully is huge. So, yeah, if you're listening, I want to encourage you to take the offer, get a hold of Chris, and have him listen to your story. And I mean, we could all use a little more hope these days, especially. So, yeah, it's been great, Chris. I really appreciate your time here. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Appreciate it. It's fun to share this. I will say this. I'll close with this thought. I mean, you said it as well. I think we all have. There's a tendency right now to have this feeling like, there's this tidal wave that's looming over us, and there's a lot of negativity that tends to get echoed to us. But I hear it myself. But my gosh, the more people I talk to, the more stories I hear. It just can't reinvigorate my hope and my faith in people. And so, anytime that anybody is feeling like that, I strongly encourage them to reach out to a friend or a business colleague and just to reconnect and to talk. And I think what you'll find is there's going to be that booster shot of positivity where you're like, wow, there is a lot of good people around myself. And so to combat the negative we hear, look for the good.
Yeah, and I believe you when you say that, and I'm going to take you up on that. I feel like I could get a hold of you and walk away from any conversation with you with a little bit more, positivity. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. I've always enjoyed our conversations. I'm hopefully I think between your insights and hopefully a few of my long-winded stories, people will walk away feeling a little bit better about their days. So if so, that's been a great way to do it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris.
Hey, Scott, thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Awakened Life podcast. I've been your host, Scott Landis. Hey, are you feeling overwhelmed and stressed out? It could be that you're out of balance or have a misalignment of your time and priorities. This month at Awakened Life Academy, we're featuring the Total Freedom Life Wheel exercise designed to help you uncover what might be off balance in your work, life, and other priorities. And then it helps you realign your priorities to your purpose. Check out the full training video and free download at wheel.awakenlife.com. That's wheel.awakenedlife.com for free access. Don't put this personal growth opportunity off. Go get it now and start to experience the freedom that balance can bring to your life. Go to wheel.awakenlife.com.